Hi, welcome to Art for All, the Sketchbook Skool podcast. I am Danny Gregory, founder of Sketchbook Skool and an author and a guy who draws and does a podcast with his friend. Introduce yourself, friend.
Hi, I'm the friend. I'm John Muir Laws. Let's try that again. I'm John Muir Laws. And I am a scientist with a sketchbook and am really interested in the intersection of art and attention and mindfulness and thinking.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You've expanded your spheres of interest.
Well, each time I introduce myself,
keep layering it on.
It's just like I thought of something else.
I'm interested
and I like squirrels.
And I like the Yankees outfield. And by the way, I like shrimp. So yes, I don't particularly like shrimp or the Yankees outfield. I don't really have an opinion about the Yankees, but a few bits of business, because we don't really do business on this podcast. Like I've been listening to podcasts a lot and, for many years. And there's a certain kind of genre of podcast, which I think our podcast has fallen into, which is the guys sitting around having long, unedited conversations, right? I think that's this. I've tried other kinds of podcasts. I've tried creating other podcasts that were like tightly engineered and had sound effects and, were fully edited and tightly scripted and all that. I'm just too old for that now, I think. I think it's come down to just prefer to just sit around with you and just jabber about whatever comes to mind.
Yeah. And this format, at least on my end, it's fun. So it's something that I look forward to each week. So I'm all for that loose format. Also, if you try to get me reading a script because of my dyslexia, it gets kind of interesting because when I'm trying to go with the script, I end up getting off script.
Right. No, I appreciate that. And I think, honestly, I think that from what I hear from people, they're kind of just listening to this idly in the background. I mean, there may be people who are sitting there with headphones on, taking detailed notes and hanging on our every words. But I don't think there's a lot of those people. I think most people are busy doing other things. They're chopping vegetables while we talk, or they're sharpening pencils, or they're napping. I don't know.
But still, if that is you with your headphones on, we've got mad respect for you. We know who you are and we love you. And this is a shout out to our friends with headphones.
Exactly, because we're busy taking notes and wearing headphones. So why shouldn't you? Like, why should we have to do all the work? Exactly. So, but one thing, speaking of that, I think that it would be nice if we heard from people now and then, so that this isn't a complete echo chamber. Because I think there are people who listen to this and watch this. And they're nice enough, by the way, to leave comments on our YouTube channel. In case you didn't know, if you're only listening to this, the audio version of this, we also are making a video version of it as we speak. And so if you'd like to see what we look like when we're talking, if you'd like to see what kind of headphones John is wearing, you can come to our YouTube channel, the Sketchbook Skool YouTube channel, and you can watch them there. But speaking of feedback, I think it would be nice if anybody had a question for us, a suggestion, a complaint, a withering criticism, whatever it is, write to us at a newly set up email address, which is podcast@sketchbookskool.com. Sketchbook Skool is spelled with a K, two Ks. Sketchbook, that's a K, and school, that's a K. So sketchbookskool.com, podcast@sketchbookskool.com. You can write us, send photographs, send, I don't know.
Oh, now you've
Bitcoin.
You've released the Kraken there.
If you have a Kraken that you'd like to attach to an email and send it to us, we will be glad to receive it. I think this is the new chapter in our lives. We've done a dozen of these episodes, and now we're welcoming the world into into the studio because I think it's appropriate because, the CDC has said, A, you don't have to wear a mask, most of you, and B, you're allowed to email the Art for All podcast. I'm not sure about the second part that the CDC explicitly said that, but it seems like the kind of thing they would say, right?
I think that it is an appropriately socially distanced, safe activity that that would also promote positive social engagement, and so that would be good for our psyches. I think it's going to be good all around.
All right, that's excellent. Good. Well, I'm glad that we agree on that. So yes. So anything you want to say to us, write to us. I'll remind you about this later on because you're probably jogging right now. So we'll also put this in the notes so you can find it. At podcast. It's fairly intuitive email address. I came up with it myself. I'm quite pleased with it.
That was a good one.
Thank you. So speaking of, how's your week been since last we spoke?
The week has been good. I've got sort of several creative projects that I've been playing with, and I think the most interesting is that I have been geeking out with the moon. A young friend of mine said, let's take a closer look at what observations we can make about the moon, and I took that seriously. And I have been trying to, when weather allows, to follow what the moon is doing and think about interesting ways of recording that and documenting it in my nature journal. And yesterday was a lunar extravaganza for me. At first every half hour and then every hour I was out making moon observations and putting those in my journal. And what I'm particularly interested in is trying to find patterns that I see that I didn't expect, and then try to reverse engineer those with, so if that's what I'm observing, what is going on in the relationship of the sun, the earth, and the moon to make me see those patterns in the sky. So
interesting. So do you have a telescope?
I've got a pair of binoculars, and I do have a telescope, but for most of this I haven't needed the telescope. Um, but my critical tools were my compass, and also my I've got some ways of estimating the height of the moon in the sky. So I was here. Let me. So since you're, let me tell you how I was kind of geeking out on this. What I was thinking is, so I've made several observations of the moon, and what I've noticed is that as the moon rises and then goes across the sky and sets, if you imagine the moon as a clock, that clock face, as the night goes on or the day goes on, it rotates as it's going through the sky. So imagine if you had a moon coming up, hold your hand in front of you to make a letter C, and then rotate that clockwise. The position of that C is going to be moving as the day or the night goes on, as it moves across the sky. And
Wait,
so
so the crescent isn't just that same crescent every time?
No, yeah. So the crescent is, well. First of all, we all kind of know that the face of the moon changes. So the crescent is getting larger, it's getting smaller, depending on what phase you are in. And then, the moon, it comes up facing one direction, and then it goes around and
Really?
it's facing it changes. Yeah, it rocks in the sky. So I was trying to get the degree of rock, and then so here's what my plans are. So I've now got a bunch of drawings sort of showing the degree of rock over time. Then can I from that figure out how much how much that moon rocks per hour. And so is it going through a full position change every 24 hours? Or is it a little bit more? Is it a little bit less? Um, and the and what I'm gearing up for is I've got sort of an international group of nature journaling friends on in next month, when the moon is a fairly hefty crescent coming up in the morning. I'm going to try to get people across the globe in the northern and the southern hemisphere to all make moon observations throughout the day from the northern and the southern hemisphere at all sorts of different latitudes. So what's it going to look like on the equator? What's it going to look like close to the poles? We're going to find out. And
that's a cool idea.
I think I'm really excited about it. And there's all sorts of like things I didn't expect. I expected the sun would rise in the same place that the moon rose. So I got out and I watched the moon rise, and I thought, okay, I think that I'm now waiting for the sun to come up in the same place. And then a different part of the sky lit up, and the sun came up in a totally different spot. And then I tracked the position of the sun across the sky and the moon across the sky. The sun went much higher in the sky than my moon. And so then I'm thinking, all right, is the plane that the moon is orbiting in, is that not at right angles the um, with the rotation of the Earth? So I never really thought much about this before, and I probably have seen diagrams showing this, but none of those stuck in my head. But now that I'm seeing this different pattern, I'm thinking like, okay, what could cause that? And so I'm first going to try to figure out as much as I can from my own observations, then bring in some international observers, and then I'll probably end up looking for answers in books and things, and trying to see how I can get those things to kind of square up. But that has been my moon geeking this week, and it's been fun.
So, my brother-in-law works at Arizona State University, and he runs the planetarium there. Have I ever told you that?
I did not know this.
Yeah, yes. So he runs a planetarium, which is like basically he has a database of the entire universe in a hard drive. It's like this incredible, and he can go to any spot in the universe, look in any direction at any time in history, and take you through. So you can go like, if you want to see like what did Saturn look like from Venus 2,000 years ago, he can take you and show you that. Yeah.
That's hard, because you've got, because the positions, the relative positions of the stars now is, if from an observer on Earth, is different than what the Greeks were looking at.
Exactly. It's all different, but he has these really powerful computers that do that. And then he does I think it's monthly, is it, or maybe it's every other week, a series on Zoom. So I think about 1,000 people can come to this thing, and he does a thing about what is going on in the night sky tonight from here in Phoenix. So he does a show, and people actually tune in from all around the world, not just from Phoenix. But he and other and the students who are in this department, they will talk about phenomena. They'll talk about all kinds of stuff, and they'll say like, "This is what you can see now," and yeah, it's pretty cool. And he, Arizona in general is sort of an epicenter of celestial observation, just because I don't know. There's just a lot of planetariums here, and
you've got some good dark skies.
Right, exactly. So not really here in Phoenix that much, although it's certainly better than it was in New York. And during the beginning of the pandemic, we would spend a lot of time watching it. And actually, he pointed out to me satellites. Like if you lie out, like I was floating in the
Yeah.
pool and he was like, look, that's a satellite. And I was like, really? How can you tell? And I started watching it and I realized like, yes, it doesn't behave like a star and it's moving across the sky. And if
Yep.
you look back at that, it's always going to be at the same point. And there's a basically like a road that all these satellites are going along that you can sort of find, there's little lights that are just moving, which is pretty cool and strange.
Even the International Space Station is visible
Yes.
from
Yeah, you can see it when it's dark
Earth.
enough.
Yeah.
Totally. And there's a team actually in their department that has for several years now been scanning the moon. So they have a satellite that orbits the moon that does these high definition
Ooh.
scans of like every foot of the moon. It's just go like a scanner. It just keeps going round and around the moon, scanning it and building a database, a 3D model of every square inch of the moon. And so they'll have the whole moon captured in the computer, so you can zoom around and go anywhere. And of course, the moon never changes. Like there's no, the wind doesn't change, the mountains don't change, nothing changes. So you can have this very accurate 3D model of the moon that
Oh,
they're
that's
building.
fun. That's
And
really
also,
fun.
those guys are also they were in charge. They worked on that the is it James Webb satellite that just went up. They were involved with the launch of that, and it traveled 1,000,000 miles in like 6 weeks. It's insane. Yeah, it traveled so fast. And then they also worked on the Mars rover. And in fact, he's been building this model of the Mars rover to go in this sort of lobby of their space. So yeah, it's a lot of cool stuff, a lot of interesting things to do with space stuff out there.
So if I wanted to get on that monthly call or Zoom
Um,
meeting,
I can send you a link and we can probably post it here.
put it in the chat,
Yes.
or not the chat, the show notes
Yeah,
for
it's
this
called
episode.
the School of Earth and Space Exploration. That's the name of the school. And it's a free Zoom webinar that they do. And you have to just register for it, and then they send you the link to it.
Oh,
And
that sounds
it's
like
on
fun.
Wednesdays. It's like every other Wednesday. But yeah, it's pretty cool. The ASU Marston Exploration Theater virtual night sky presentation.
That sounds
Yeah,
good.
it's a
That
mouthful.
sounds good.
Yeah.
Anything that if you just start. So I'm so obsessed with the moon that I've been seeing this thing kind of go around my entire life, but I've never really followed it. Like, yesterday it did this wonderful thing. So as I was sketching it, as the day went along, every hour I'm making another drawing of what I can see of the moon. And you could actually see it from hour to hour. And I've seen this from night to night, like, oh, you're now a skinnier moon. But during the course of one day, you can observe it getting noticeably skinnier. And for my last observation, it was just, harder and harder and harder to see. And then my last observation of the day yesterday, I could not find the moon. And so I know it was up there somewhere. And I was, from the measurements that I had taken already, I knew right where to look. And even with my binoculars, couldn't find it. And that was also fun.
Stolen by the Russians, probably.
Those rascals. Um, that in the early morning hours, Venus was very bright above it, and
Mhm.
because I had also measured the distance from the moon up to Venus, then during the day, um, for most of the morning, I could still see, even though the sun was out, it was broad daylight. I could go like, look, there's Venus. I could still see Venus sitting up there in the daytime sky. Um,
Yeah, I love it when you see the moon in, like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, still up there.
yes,
It's amazing how just the moon moves and reappears and rises in such totally different places at such totally different times. it's kind of startling sometimes that it's,
Yeah, yeah, and this is also fun. The depending on the phase that the moon is in, it actually is, it's really consistent. That, yeah, it changes when it is coming up, but for each, let's take the full moon for example. The full moon always rises right at sunset.
Oh, the
So you'll
full moon
never
does. Yeah.
see a full moon rise in the middle of the night.
It's true, and you see it's so gigantic. So particularly when it's close to the horizon, it's so big,
Mm-hmm.
right? And do you understand that phenomenon of why it is that the moon seems so huge when it's close to the horizon?
My understanding is, and this uh, I'd say it's your brother is the astronomer.
My brother-in-law, yeah,
Brother-in-law.
my
So
wife's
that
sister's
that that,
brother.
that your brother-in-law, if you've got your headphones on while jogging, listening to this podcast, we want to hear from you. Um, the uh, my understanding is that it's that because we've got something to compare it to. When
Right,
it's
that's what
just
I've
up
always thought.
there in the sky, there's no point of reference.
Right, but if it's the size of a building, then you're like, oh wow, it seems really huge.
Wow,
But
it's
if
like,
it's
yeah,
up,
look at that tree.
right,
Yeah, yeah. When I came out uh, yesterday in the pre-dawn hours to catch the early rising moon, um, I the moon was already a little bit up in the sky, and it was just behind this distant palm tree. So it looked like there was this little stalk going up to this kind of trufula tree with the moon in it. Um, that was fun.
that's classic. Yeah, because when you try and take a photograph of the moon, just like with your regular camera, it's always disappointing, right? It's just
Hmm.
like at best, it's
Hmm.
a little kind of looks like a headlight or something. It's not, it can look
Yeah,
like this gigantic sphere, and then you take a picture, and it's just like meh,
man.
like a house light. Yeah,
That's why we've got our nature journals and our journals to record our actual experience.
there you go.
Uh, And there's also something that's fun that the that astronomers do to get those beautiful photographs of the moon that show all the details and craters and all the nooks and crannies. I used to think that those photographs were taken during a full moon because you can see the whole moon. But if you think about it, during a full moon, the sunlight is shining directly on the face of that moon so that there are no shadows.
Ah, good point.
And so it would just, all those would be lost. And if you think about for our drawings, when we get the light angle down low so it kind of rakes across an object, that low light is really useful for defining form and showing shape. Very often in the middle of the day when the sun is just blasting straight down, the shadows are less interesting. But, and it's the same is true on the moon. So to get those photographs that show all the craters, what they do is they take a photograph of a crescent moon, and right on the edge between the dark, along the terminator line between the light and the dark, there are cool shadows. And so they just take that little slice and they put that onto the picture. Then they wait a little bit, they get the for that shadow to move a little bit, and then they take the next photograph, they get the next little slice. And so those are composite pictures getting all the slices along that shadow edge, which also sort of reminds me, when I'm making a sketch of something, where do I put the texture in? You're going to get the best kind of indication of texture with shadows close to the, sort of not in the highlight area, but close to sort of that terminator edge where the light turns into dark. Right along that edge, you're going to get all your cool shadows, just like on the moon.
That's interesting. So, so I wanted this was today. The moon was not the theme. You've hijacked this
I have
podcast.
hijacked it with
We've
the
been
moon. Oh, let's talk more about the moon.
we spent 25 minutes talking about the moon, but
But again, anything when you start just geeking out on it hard. It's just like the wonder of the moon. I feel like it's like the first time that I'm experiencing like this degree of moon wonder, because using my journal, I've spent a month, and then yesterday all day just going moon, 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 moon.
It's sheer lunacy.
Oh, da dum da. There you
Exactly.
go.
Yeah. So, yeah. Well, geekery though was potentially our topic, because our
Mhm.
topic that we had both agreed on was we wanted to talk about technology. And it reminds me, actually, speaking of the moon, thinking about like one of the gizmos that I have on my phone is called Sky Guide, which is an augmented reality application on your phone. So you basically hold your phone up and it shows you what you may not be able to identify. So if you type in the moon, it'll tell you where the moon is, even if it's below the horizon. And then also it'll tell you everything you want to know about any star, and you can click on the star and touch it with your finger, and it opens up a window and tells you all that kind of stuff. So I've found, because I really don't know much at all about any of this stuff, but sitting around in the pandemic in the backyard, staring at the sky as much as we did, I was really curious to learn. And my brother-in-law's taught me a certain amount about it, but I've found that having this app on my phone has been really useful. Is that the kind of thing you would ever do?
Yeah, I've got an app like that on my phone.
You do? Okay.
Yeah, I know. I think it's brilliant. It's yeah, you hold that your camera up, and it's on like you're seeing the stars, and it's like here's the pattern you should be looking at. And the I actually brought out my phone when I couldn't find the moon yesterday afternoon. I brought out my phone and said, "All right, find the moon for me," and held it up, and it said the moon is right here, and then it looked right in that spot with my binoculars. I'm like, I don't see the moon, and it didn't help me out of that jam, but it was in that pinch. I reached for that little bit of tech. The but the but but still, I want to encourage people to spend some time trying to learn those constellations, because there's something wonderful about seeing, once you kind of realize that there are these familiar patterns, or they will become familiar to you. You'll walk out at night, and like there's the other night we were kind of getting home rather late, and my daughter said, "Daddy, come look at Orion." And we walked down the street and we spent some time staring at Orion. And the she is she's very into Harry Potter, and so she knows also there are some stars that characters in the Harry Potter books that are named after um, after stars. And so we're like, oh, there's Sirius, and she's like, and that one there, Dad, see there, that's Bellatrix. And so who's one of the ne'er do wells in the Harry Potter land,
Right.
and but then it's like there are these old friends in the sky, and the best way to learn those, this is actually kind of old school tech. There's a book. There is a book, and it's called The Stars, of all crazy names. It's called The Stars, and it's by, see if you recognize this author, H.A. Rey. Do you remember H.A. Rey? Does that name
Yes,
ring
of
any
course.
bells?
Curious George.
Curious George. That's
Yeah.
right. The author of Curious George wrote the best book for learning the constellations. And because you can redraw those patterns any way you want, and he redrew them in ways that are easy to remember and easy to see and easy to find. And so you got to bring your Curious George author out there. So between that app and The Stars by H.A. Rey, you can really get good at identifying the constellations when you're laying there in your backyard.
That is pretty cool. I mean, my brother-in-law has also been working with Native Americans and the sort of their view of the sky and the stars and legends and stuff like that they have, and all kinds of interesting ways that that they use observing the stars and the planets to, I don't know, maybe to tell time. I'm not sure all the different things that they do, but obviously the stars and the planets mean a lot to everybody. But going back to the theme that I insist that I'm going to continue pushing on you, despite your lunar predisposition.
Earlier you did invite me to kind of take some sidelines and alleys, but maybe you
I
weren't
know, but I'm
considering
rescinding
this
that
many.
invitation. I'm rescinding it because we have a schedule to
We
adhere to.
have an agenda.
We have a railroad to run here. But I'm interested in talking about just technology because I feel like certainly as a naturalist, there are technological tools that I imagine are useful. I mean, like for me, like I found this app called Seek, SEEK, that is pretty amazing, where you can basically aim it at any plant or also theoretically at any animal, and it really quickly it breaks it down and says like, okay, this is the class and the phylum and the this and that, and then it'll say, okay, I've identified it as this, and I identified every plant in our backyard using it in about 10 minutes, and it was really cool because I had no idea of how to do it otherwise. Because, and then it also there's one that the Audubon Society has for identifying birds, and you can just basically turn your phone on and record a little clip of
Yep,
birdsong.
Merlin.
Yeah, and it's amazing at that too.
Yeah, the Merlin app, you hear a bird singing, you turn it on, you record that bird, and it'll say like, I think you're listening to this,
Yeah,
and you want to hear some other birds singing that thing. You can. It's that's so that little piece of technology is really fascinating. Apparently, it's hard to do voice recognition software on birds, and so what they did to make it work is inside the phone. The phone is turning um, the sound into a sonogram picture showing frequency
right,
over time. And then it's analyzing the shape of the picture. So it's turning the sound into an image, then analyzing the image and using recognition software
right,
to identify your bird. Yeah, that's the Merlin app.
right.
That's really useful. And
It's like
another one,
Shazam for birds, basically.
yes. And did you know that they make that for bats?
Oh gosh, really?
Yeah. My daughter Carolyn is so into bats. She loves bats. So she calls herself Bat Girl. She's got tons of bat stuffies. My nickname for her is Fruit Bat. And
So you're
so
Robin.
the but with this you can the bats are making echolocation sounds that are beyond our hearing. So there's a little device that you can plug into your phone, and then um, listen. It brings the sounds of the bat vocalizations down to frequencies that you can hear. So you can hear the bats around you going click, 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 click. And then if you want to, it will also then analyze the patterns and timings and frequencies that the bats are vocalizing at and give you their thoughts on which species that is based on those vocalizations.
And what is that called?
That's called. We're just
And
going to
does
bring
it
it
tell
up
you what
here.
they're saying? That's the next step.
That's right.
They're
Um,
saying it's the Joker, it's the Penguin. No, it's the Riddler.
it's the Echometer from
Echometer.
Wildlife Acoustics. Um, and so there's a little module that you plug into your phone, and so we can go out and we can use that, and you can listen to the bats singing, and they do this really cool stuff. So as they're kind of cruising around, they're going, and then when they start to get pings off of a moth, so they're listening for the echo of their own voice off a moth. Right?
Wow.
That's crazy. And so as they get closer to the moth, they kind of go into these from these sort of separate staccato ones to these trills as they're kind of getting closer and closer to the moth. And so you can hear when they're kind of in a feeding buzz. It'll be, and then can correlate that with their behavior, because you'll be watching the bat flying along, and all of a sudden it'll take this sudden change of direction, and during that time it's going these little trills. So, wow, that's cool.
Absolutely. That is interesting. Because I was reading about, there's a thing where you can train your dog to understand words, and then there are buttons that you can program. That's right. So you can buy like a big plastic button, and you can program it so that you give a word to the dog, and then if the dog will hit the appropriate button. So you can have different buttons that are tied to different words, so that the dog, it's only if you say that word that button works. I think that's how it works. So there's a whole like kind of cult of training your dog to understand words, and these buttons are the way that you do it. I clearly don't know a lot about it, and I haven't trained my dog to do that yet, but yeah, that seems sort of useful too. Because they're also, because I think there are also things where you can have a collar that a dog can vocalize certain words.
What?
Yes, there's something like that. I
So
may be
then
making this up,
the
but I think
question is, yeah, with that, we have to be really, really careful thinking about what the animal is actually perceiving and meaning and understanding. Like there's this sort of famous cases of people being confused about animals' ability to understand things, and we want to sort of project our human language and understanding onto other species as well. There's this wonderful case of, have you heard of Clever Hans?
Yes, the horse.
Clever Hans the horse, who they thought could do all sorts of elaborate mathematical computations and to understand music theory and all this crazy stuff. And what the horse was doing is actually scanning people's, which is also equally amazing, was scanning people's facial expressions to know when to stop stomping its hoof. And then it was rewarded. So if Clever Hans couldn't see people's faces, Clever Hans couldn't do any of these things. But I wonder if this,
Well, I can tell you a bit more about it,
dog.
because while you were talking, I'm looking at the American Kennel Club website, which I'm sure wouldn't lie to us.
Okay.
And they're talking about a book that was written by a woman named Christina Hunger, a San Diego-based speech language pathologist. And so here's how the buttons work. Each button is pre-programmed with words that her dog can select between to communicate wants, needs, and thoughts. So, for instance, if the dog wants to go and pee, there's a button that says potty, and the dog knows that if I want to pee, I push that button. Right. Okay. But you can train it to say, like, I want a snack, or I want this or that. And you can have a whole series of buttons, and when the dog pushes the button, you record a word into it. And this dog, she's written a book about it. The dog has like 40 or 50 of these buttons, and it can say all kinds of things. And apparently it can sometimes combine buttons too to create more complex thoughts.
You'd have to be really, really careful about how you research that and analyze it, because everybody wants their dog to be communicating with them on all these levels, and it would be easy to overread into that.
Or also decide that you don't want to hear what the dog says. Like if I train my dog and I said, if you push this button, it will say snack. She would just push the button all day long.
You're just going to keep pushing that snack button until you run out of treats.
Useful. That's always the thing. It's like if your animal could talk, it might not actually be that interesting. It might be like having like a 3-year-old that sort of interesting, but after a while, like not that interesting
Well,
and more annoying than anything.
one of the more kind of interesting kind of dives into this um, were the Alex studies with Alex the gray parrot, and Alex was uh, a parrot owned by Dr. Irene Pepperberg, and she and her team of students first, taught the parrot to talk, which is was nothing particularly special because everybody can say Polly wants a cracker. But when Polly says Polly want a cracker, does Polly mean I am Polly? And it is my desire to have that cracker. Or is that just something that, if I make this sound, I get a treat?
Mm-hmm.
Well, with the Alex studies, they had all these wonderful controls to figure out what exactly does Alex understand, and how is Alex just essentially parroting things back, or is Alex actually using language? And it turns out Alex was using language. Alex was using very sophisticated language, and they were able to determine that Alex could actually do all sorts of abstract thought, where um, that there wasn't just that objects around were made out of different materials, and you could describe the same. You could look at an object and say, what material is it made out of? And Alex wouldn't just sort of say, it's a triangle, it's the triangle. But let's say the triangle is made out of metal. You'd say, what material? And Alex would go like, that's metal. What's the shape? Triangle, right? Or how many corners? 3, right? And then on this tray, how many things are made out of wood? And so, I mean, they're able to kind of do a really kind of deep dive into exactly what Alex the parrot could understand, and it's incredible what Alex was able to do, and is a good example of an organism that is clearly using language, but they needed to really tightly control things, because if I'm thinking my dog is really intelligent and is communicating to me, I'm going to interpret everything that my dog does in that framework. And confirmation bias is is does brutal things to our ability to kind of think and perceive. So if you're I would say that I would wait for people to do some really kind of carefully controlled studies before making um, any leaps in thinking about what is going on inside my dog's head.
All right, then I won't bother.
Oh no, no! I mean, but you could be that person. You could be that guy.
Oh,
Um,
the
no,
man who
but I'm just saying that
taught a
this is
pug to
it's
hack a computer. Yeah.
it. But that would be an area where you'd want to just realize that, so that we don't have another kind of clever Hans like experience going on.
Well, what about
That
Coco the chimp, who
Coco the
spoke
chimp was using
ASL, right?
language. Yeah, using language. So Coco the chip was using language. Um, the the and Alex the parrot was using language. Um, and the Alex the parrot. You'd have to kind of get back into the studies, but they're able to figure out. I think Alex understood the concept of zero, and that's a clever bird, clever bird.
That's that's hilarious. So, what about map technology? Right, I'm sure you use maps, right, when you're doing. I
Yeah.
mean, what a
So
transformation that's made! The ability to go anywhere, right, and have a map. It's like you never need to get lost again. Never, as long as you're within range of a good signal.
yeah, when I go out backpacking, I like to have a 7.5 minute U.S. Geographic Service topographical map in my hand and a compass.
So a physical map, a
physical map. I don't. I like the process of land navigation with it, but I think that is perhaps more just because that's a personal preference of mine.
But I mean, they're
I like also.
amazing. They're amazing hiking map apps that
Mhm.
trail. I forget what it's called, All Trails. Where you can kind of go to really remote places and have incredible degrees of detail and information.
Yeah, the GPS systems that are now built into our telephones are absolutely amazing, and also I'll use those. Sometimes I'm drawing, I'm making got a page in my journal, and I want to draw a map view of the Point Reyes Peninsula showing the location where I am, and so I can now pull out my phone, go boop boop boop, and a map view of where I am appears, and then I can zoom out and then draw that larger Point Reyes, put myself in as a little locator map. Um, that's really cool. That's that's fun.
So
But there's
are we
something.
gaining more or losing more with this capability in
Well,
terms
I
of?
mean, it depends on what we're using and how we're using it, because there are, um, for instance, if you have the Seek app and you say the purpose of this is to help me identify flowers, and then I know the flowers, so I don't have to really look at them anymore.
Mhm.
You're going to have a much more shallow experience than you would kind of pulling through books and looking carefully at the flowers yourself, rather than have the camera of the phone look at the flower for you and identify it. You would actually have to look at the parts and count the parts and go like, well, this one is actually fuzzy down here on the stem, and so it's not that one. I think it's this one. It is this one. I think that I like things that very often the technology can make some things fast, but very often there's richness in slowing down and paying attention to the flower. And if your camera in your phone is the only one who really gets to see the flower, but you don't, you can go like, oh yeah, that's a forget me not. Now I can forget that, right? Because the next time I need to know, I'll just go like, oh, what's that? Oh, it's a forget me not. Um, I think you're. Um, I think that is a an experience that you're going to be missing out on a lot of the depth and the beauty of the world. Um, Being able
Okay.
to walk along the trail and to know the birds by ear and go like, oh, I'm hearing this bird over here and I'm hearing this bird over here. The goal is actually to be able to do that yourself, not and the and learning how to do that through the phone. Um, that because like, there's that bird, I can't find it. Who is that? Like, oh, it's you. That's convenient. But the old school way to do it would be is I'd write that down in my journal. I'd have a visual kind of sonogram that I would write out of a bird song, and I would call it Mystery Bird, um, G, and um, and then I'd be walking along someday and like, oh, there's Mystery Bird G again. And because I had paid careful attention to it, that acoustic pattern would jump out of the sound environment because
Okay.
I had paid so much attention to it.
I'm going to disagree with you just for the hell of it, because I think yes, I agree that if I'm a really ardent naturalist, that would be true. If I'm a more casual observer, which I am of generally most things, I find that like looking up at the night sky and trying to identify stars has always been really difficult for me to do, and I'm not interested enough to really push it that far. I remember when we lived in New York, there was a bird that would start singing at certain times of year at about 4:45 in the morning, and we called it the jerk. and it would just start singing, and it would wake us up. We'd wake up and it's, oh, it's the jerk. And it meant that like the sun was probably going to rise in about 20 minutes, but it was earlier than we wanted to get up. So we always knew the jerk. We had no idea what bird it was. We never saw what it looked like.
Guessing mockingbird.
Might have been. I don't know if they have those in New York. I mean, we have a million of them here, but the jerk was just, and and then so I think that what technology has allowed me to do is to know enough to be not dangerous, but know enough about something that I would otherwise not that I would not know anything at all about. And I think that that's been true of a lot of forms of technology. I mean, the ability to, for instance, Shazam, to be able to be in a restaurant and a song comes on and you can pull out your phone and you can identify the song. I think in a lot of cases, finding about any kind of trivia, like there's been a lot of times where I've been like talking about something on YouTube and suddenly somebody is obviously like Wikipediaing what I'm talking about and correcting me in the notes. That kind of thing happens a lot, where basically information is really readily accessible. It doesn't mean that knowledge is different, but it's possible to find out anything. And I always wonder about, the kinds of things that we used to learn in school, that there was a kind of a premium on learning dates in history class, learning formulas in chemistry class. All those kinds of things are now sort of archaic. Even learning a language, right? When you can whip out your phone and turn on Google Translate and basically have anybody, anything anybody is saying just instantly being translated by your phone, it means, learning languages becomes a quaint sort of thing, but unnecessary. So,
my guess is that you are stretching the point to make the point, that you don't feel that there's no reason to learn Spanish, because there is, but that this technology is useful and it can be really helpful. So I'm not a Luddite. I don't think that the technology is bad, but I think that we should learn to speak other languages because it opens up a different kind of connection and understanding with other people that I don't think that you can get intermediated through an app. And also, it challenges our brains to be continuously growing and thinking. Back before we had GPS systems in our cars, my sense is that I had a better geographic sense of the spaces between things and sort of the relationship of one little town to another. Now when you just sort of plug in the destination, you're not having to kind of look at the maps and sort of visually think about things. I use a GPS for driving around in my car all the time, but it is a different experience than navigating other ways. I don't think that it's an equivalent experience to be able to have a conversation with somebody versus be able to get your app to say, where is bathroom?
I get your point, and I'm disagreeing with you for the sake of having a conversation, but but I also think life is finite, and there's only so much that we can do. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, it would be true that if we eliminated a lot of these things that we have adopted for the sake of convenience, we might be able to retain certain skills and, sensitivities that we are being deprived of. right? And we could go back to the days when everybody knew at most 100 people in their entire lives, right? And most people didn't travel more than 5 miles from the place that they were born. And most people, had just much more limited experiences of the world, whereas now we have so much access to so much stuff. And I admit that we are losing skills and things because of that. However, we're also gaining enormous skills, right? So when you talk about the connections that we have between people that language affords us, yes, it's true, but there's many, many ways in which we are now connected to other people that never used to be the case. Regardless of even if we're all speaking English, or even if we have a plugin in our Chrome browser that's instantly translating everything we're saying so that we can speak to other people. I mean, all those things are available to us, and I think it's a trade-off. I think the fact that it's easier to have a shallow understanding of a much broader amount of information is probably better than leaving it to the experts, I think. And I think, I'm a champion of jacks of all trade, as it were. I believe in having kind of medium amounts of information and medium amounts of skills in lots of different realms, and not being an expert in particular, because I think it makes life more interesting, and I like being a dilettante. So that doesn't mean that there isn't room for experts, but I just think that the knee-jerk reaction that says, "Well, we're giving up this stuff," is I'm not on board with that.
Yeah. I guess the way I would break that down is that life is finite, yes, but you are also, so there's richness that you can have by sort of sampling um, a little bit from a lot of things. There's a different kind of richness that you get from spending time and soaking into a moment or a place. So my camera allows me the ability to take snapshots throughout the city. As a matter of fact, I could put my camera on a drone and have it whiz around the streets more quickly than I could walk, and to record in HD all sorts of
4K.
details of Venice.
Yeah.
Or I could sit by the side of a canal for 2 hours and sketch and paint and talk to the people who are passing by and looking over my shoulder. And that experience would be profoundly different. There are times when the technology does allow us to do different things. So, for instance, sending that little drone up and kind of getting a pigeon's eye view of the the plaza, that might be interesting. But the but just because something is fast and it allows me then to do a bunch of things quickly, there's also going to be a cost to that. And I think that you then are not going as there's a tendency to think that then the goal is to do a lot fast, and sort of that, the idea of fear of missing out, as opposed to taking your time and kind of sort of having a slow food experience with wherever you are and whatever you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, I don't disagree with you. I think it's not an either or situation, though.
Yes, that's
I
right.
think it's like, you can skim the surface and then you can dive deep. You don't have to choose. You can, it's kind of like you can have a relationship with somebody where you text message them and you send them 4 words, 8 times a day. Or you can see them once every 3 months and sit down for 3 hours and talk to them, right? Or you can do both, right? You can have both kinds of conversations with the same person. And, I think technology makes a lot of things easy. And sometimes that easiness means we take important things for granted or we forget to go deep because, again, like why read a history book when you could just go to Wikipedia and look something up if you need to know it? Well, because there's a certain pleasure that comes from reading a history book and from getting that context and that depth. But it doesn't. I don't think it's an either or situation. I think that technology allows us to be alive and awake and connected in amazing ways that I think gives us much more understanding of other people. It's ironic that we're living in a time that there's a certain amount of intolerance that we're seeing for other people broadly. But I think that intolerance has always existed in human beings. I think we always tend to be suspicious and intolerant of other people. But I think the connections that we make with other people it's enabled by technology is also really important and profound and is probably going to contribute to saving us as a species because we can collaborate because we can connect with people around the world and we can also find commonalities and similarities. Again, thanks to technology. I don't have a lot of patience for people who are just dismissive of technology in any realm. And it's part because I think the technology is fantastic. I mean, I just think it's just a fantastic creation. I think this is the greatest time in human history to have been alive. But I geek out about technology. I always have. I mean, I learned to write basic code when I was like 14 in high school. I've built websites my whole life. I've been an early adopter of technologies of so many kinds. I just think that the art of technology is fascinating as a thing that's being built. And I don't know, I think the people who are resistant to technology on the face of it, I just don't do that. I don't know how to use that. I'm not interested in learning that. I don't need the latest this and that. I'm not that impressed by that as an argument. I just think that it's a cool thing that people make that is really interesting. And so as a result of that, I'm always interested in what technology is doing and where it can lead us. But I do acknowledge the price that we pay for certain aspects of it. I just think that price is less than the benefits.
Yeah, I use lots of technology in my life. It's, um, and so I think that you're saying it's not a choice either or, but it's a yes and you just do want to be aware that these different how you interact with something will change the experience that you have. How you interact with someone will change the experience that you have. If you are um, if you are um, and things that I think that's also we want to remember that we as human beings are not stuck with the capacities and the abilities and the skills that we currently have. We can still learn how to um, cook. We can still learn how to juggle. We can still learn how to speak another language. We can still learn to identify birdsong. Our capacity for learning things is really amazing, and we're not locked into just what we have. So I'd say that also don't. If you're saying to yourself like I can't identify constellations, it may be that you've never you've never pulled out H.A. Ray's book. If you're saying like, I can't do math, it may be that the teacher that you had who sort of exposed you to math is somebody who made it all about speed computation rather than thinking and ideas.
Or I can't draw.
I can't draw. It's a skill that we can develop.
But I think
And
technology can make it easier to do that. In other words, digital tools can help you develop analog skills, right?
mhm,
You can learn to play the ukulele by watching a YouTube video.
yeah,
So I think that technology is a tool. Like I think about a screwdriver, right? A screwdriver, I can undo a screw with a screwdriver. Then I could get like an electric screwdriver, or I can get a screw driving attachment from my drill. Now, if I don't use it properly, I will strip the screw, or I will damage the thing that I'm trying to unscrew. But if I'm able to use it properly, I can remove screws much faster. And so I know how to use this tool and I use it properly. So a tool can be damaging if it's not used properly, but understanding when and how to use it is, just part of the drill, as it were, in learning to use a drill.
that up. That.
So I think there's certain types of technology like social media that is definitely a devil's bargain, right? We have there's certain benefits that we've gotten from it in terms of connection, but there's definitely a heavy price that we're paying for it as it's poorly managed and out of control and is driving
Yeah,
wedges between us and misinforming us, and it's too powerful. And and I think,
incredibly powerful disinformation machine,
yeah, it's
and also sort of it's also a powerful tool for confirming and reinforcing any idea that I have. Doesn't not I'm not saying um, for fact checking things, but for if I want to find, like, if I've got some idea, I can very quickly find somebody who agrees with me, and
yeah,
then it just
exactly.
makes me feel that I'm more right.
Exactly,
Um,
confirmation bias, yeah. But it's like the internal combustion engine, right? Incredibly important technology, transformed us as a species, and now we're paying a heavy price for it, right? Because it's
mhm.
affected the environment. I think that's every technology. You could go back and you could say the invention of fire has the ability to destroy things. The invention of the sword or the arrow. All of our inventions and our developments, they have the ability to destroy us as well. Nuclear weaponry. I mean, this just goes on and on. That technology is is a tool. It's an innovation. It helps to advance us. And just to bring it back to our topic, uh, art making and technology. I think that there's a lot
Mhm.
of technology tools that I know that I've resisted. I've resisted digital art making. I did for a while because I just didn't like the examples that I saw of it. There were certain things that are built into making things with a computer that kind of detracted from my analog experience of drawing with a pen, you know? So if you're drawing with a mouse sitting at a computer, um, it's a different experience than drawing with a pen on a piece of paper. And I remember when I first started to encountered Procreate on the iPad, which is a drawing tool that allows you to really, it's like an endless art supply store that you have. And you can watercolor and you can oil paint and you can draw with every possible pen and brush imaginable. Um, the It took me a while to come to an understanding of it as a tool, that it wasn't a
Mhm.
way of simulating analogs tools. It was a way of doing something different, completely new, but still really powerful and flexible. And with time, I was able to make it as expressive and emotional as I was with a pen and a brush. What are your feelings about digital art making technology?
there's you know there are people who are absolutely brilliant with it and do beautiful things, and it's just different. For the stuff that I do, part of it becomes impractical because I'm going out in the 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 wet. I'm going outdoors and in cold conditions and wet conditions, and following a squirrel and looking for what it does and wanting to take notes about that. If I'm trying to do that on my tablet, I'm endangering the life of my tablet. Um, the and more when at the first things that the interface of them were so kind of clunky that it got in the way of the drawing process.
Right.
And now a lot of that is getting out of the way, and it's becoming much more intuitive, and people are able to do absolutely great stuff. Um, just for but for the specific kind of thing that I do, um, the analog is at this point more useful to me because it's not going to run out of battery. It is not going to get damaged by the sun. It's not going to get damaged by the cold. Of course, it can get damaged if I drop it in a river.
Yeah.
But that did happen to one of my journals, and but a tablet would have been in even worse shape.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense, and I think, I imagine you use digital technology when you put a book together.
Absolutely.
It's essential. I think things like Photoshop are really valuable tools. I think also technology. I mean, we're using technology, digital technology, right now to record this conversation. I think recording, sound, music, all those kinds of things. Digital technology is incredibly useful and democratizing. Certainly with video production, the fact that anybody with a phone is able to make a video that they can share with the world is an incredible transformative power that was unthinkable 20 years ago. That idea that a phone and YouTube, you can be anywhere in the world and you can make a video easily. I think um, for me, being able to read a book on a Kindle has been really powerful as well. I read a huge amount of books. I can take a book out of the library at 3 o'clock in the morning if I wake up and want something new to read. I think all those things are really great, and so I think it's a very, very powerful force that we still need to be smart about. We still need to be aware about. I think as artists, we need to. I think there's two sides of it. As artists, we need to be open to new ideas. That's an essential part of being creative, I think, is not to have closed your mind down to any tool that could be helpful. But similarly, as artists, we need to retain our connection to the now. We need to be present. We need to be able to be in touch with what's going on around us. We need to not just get into a fog, and technology can fog us easily, fog our brains with its power. So I think it's that's my response to it in the end, is to recognize its value, to embrace its value, but not to be blinded by it too.
And I guess I would tag on to that each each medium that you use um, comes with it. Essentially the user experience is going to be different in these different sorts of things. So if I am um, and also with different with different sorts of tools in your hand, the purpose of what you're doing changes. So if you have an app in your hand that allows you to very quickly identify flowers, you might think that then the goal is to identify flowers.
Mhm.
If you have a journal in your hand that allows you to record information and then you might think that your goal is to document your observations and to observe the flower more closely. So each of these technologies is going to give you a different experience. And you touched on this, but being aware that built into some of these technologies are very intentional and deliberate human conditioning protocols. If I'm sort of going after kind of likes and hearts and comments and subscribers, the way that I'm going to interact with the world through that technology is different than if I am motivated by, let's say, an intrinsic curiosity of the moon.
Right.
And the social engineering that is happening in many apps, the people who are designing that are the cutting edge of human cognitive psychology. They know what makes us tick. They know what kind of keeps us there. They know those sorts of things. And they get paid for kind of getting us to spend more time in that app environment, clicking those sorts of things.
It's true. I mean, their motivation behind the tool is not what it seems to be on the face of it.
That's right.
It is accomplishing. Social media is accomplishing.
It then changes the way we interact with other phenomena.
Right.
That I'm then say chasing likes and shares, and that is different than say the motivation of wanting to connect with a place or people or other living things on a deeper level. The objectives of the people who made that app may not be something that is good for you, good for the planet, good for your community.
Right. You'll be like a dog clicking a button to get a snack. To be Pavlovian about it. So, all right, good. Well, I think we have. I think this is an interesting area to talk about.
Yeah.
And I think we've done a reasonable job of at least touching upon some of the main points. So thank you for joining me in doing this. I want to remind people again, write to us, podcast@sketchbookskool.com. If you have a technological device that is capable of sending email, send us one. Tell us what you think. Tell us what you'd like us to talk about. Tell us that you have a question, whatever it is. We look forward to hearing from you.
Disagree with us.
Yes.
In a respectful way.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. If it's not respectful, we will delete it with prejudice. So yes, so write to us, and maybe we will in future episodes address some of these emails in the broadcast. Let's see how it goes. Hey, thanks very much, Jack. It was fun to chat with you again.
It was fun to chat with you as well. Today I can't go out and watch the moon because it's now. If by yesterday afternoon it was so thin that it had disappeared on me, there's no moon for me to observe today. So I've got all this time on my hands, and I'm glad I got a chance to hang out and talk with you.
Well, I'm glad I could keep you busy. That's good. This has been the Art for All podcast with me, Danny Gregory, and John Muir Laws. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
See you next time.